Hey
Right.
everyone, welcome back to the Oxytocin Effect with Caitlyn and Joe.
We're back. Well, we're going to go over quite a few things today, but to start out, I want to ask if you saw the scene from the pit of the free birth.
I didn't, and I knew
Okay.
that this was going to come up. I knew we haven't even talked about the pit, but I knew that someone was going to ask me a question about the pit. I have only watched the first two episodes, so no, I've
I
not gotten
haven't,
there yet.
I haven't like watched the show at all. I've just seen the clip of that scene.
Oh,
Okay, let's watch it together.
so I'm gonna find the clip.
Because
Oh, this is gonna
because
be a good
people
one
have
to react to.
interesting
I'm
takes
actually
on
really
people have
excited.
interesting takes on it. You'll see. You'll see. You'll see. Okay, I think
It's not just a free birth; it appears that it is a wild pregnancy as well. A wild, right?
it is a wild
Yes.
pregnancy.
Which, for
Um,
those of you who don't know what that is, no prenatal care, no nothing during pregnancy. And then during the birth, you are also unassisted, meaning there's nobody with medical experience or training present.
mhm,
I think it's interesting how she said, I want a free birth and not I wanted a free birth, because at this point, it's not a free
mhm.
birth anymore.
No.
I think one of the most unrealistic things about this so far is that the ER hasn't already transferred them to OB.
Yeah. Yeah.
The ER doesn't want to touch a pregnant lady with a 10-foot
They
pole,
are a
especially
hundred
someone with
percent,
no prenatal
a
care.
hundred
They'd be
percent.
like, please no.
My brother-in-law is an ER nurse, and he was like, "That's the literal most inaccurate thing about the
I
pit
know.
is
I'm
that
like, why
anytime
is
a
she
pregnant
still
person
here?
comes in, they even talk to her. Like she would be in a wheelchair headed up to L&D
I know.
immediately."
I'm like, wouldn't even catch a glimpse of,
Yeah.
of an ER room.
No.
She'd be up to OB
No.
in like no
No.
time flat. I'm really confused as to what their end game here is. Like, the baby needs to come
Mhm.
out, and yet there is no obstetrician in sight.
There's no OB in sight. The fetal monitors
Yeah,
are
what are they
not
planning on
facing the right
doing?
way. Like,
They are totally ERing her for sure.
uh-huh.
Giving her
Yeah.
all the things, but what she needs is not to be pregnant anymore.
Yes. Because the OB's just
Is he about to
meandering.
do a bedside C-section? Do they not have an OB unit? That's possible. Maybe this
That's
hospital with this
possible.
massive ER somehow does not
But
have a
they
labor and
said that
delivery.
OB
That
had been
that can't happen.
paged. They're like, OB's been paged. They're just not
The
here yet.
OB's like taking his time.
Yeah, for the stat C section on severe preeclampsia in the ER. That definitely would happen.
And why did they put the betadine on her belly button?
Where are they
They like
cutting?
splashed it all over the middle of her belly. Oh, that's why they're gonna cut. Oh, okay. Well, like a whole. They cut through her whole abdomen from like under the bust all the way down.
Yeah. Which is crazy because, like, stat cesareans are usually still low transfers. Like,
The OB is now here. This
yeah.
patient has been sliced open.
Yeah.
I know, and that guy, I mean, the OBGYN just walks in like, oh, hey, what's
Like,
going
what's
on
going
in
on,
here?
guy?
Like,
Yeah.
like he just grabbed a coffee right
Yeah.
before then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm
So
always
that's
I'm
how
always
people are being
enamored by the way
depicted.
that we portray birth and things, yeah, in television shows. I do know The Pit is
Yeah.
pretty accurate in comparison to a lot of medical shows.
Yeah.
And I do love that they incorporated a free birth into their final episode. But not perfect. There's some weirdness going on there, but
Not great. Not great. And I think like the thing that was interesting to me was like watching OBGYNs talk about it online because I saw a couple people kind of being like they were kind of being rude to her and then OB's being like, "Well, like what are you gonna do? She came in and she like didn't have any prenatal care. I don't think anybody was mean to her." And I was like,
mm,
"I don't know. They said, 'Why are you here?' Shouldn't you be like, we're so glad that you came in." You know what I
yeah,
mean?
that's a good point.
Like,
That's quite an introduction to medical care. If you haven't seen any, provider your whole pregnancy, and then you come in, and the very first thing you're asked, well, why? What are you doing here? Like that's not quite the way that I think we should be introducing ourselves to people who obviously
yeah.
have very little trust in the medical
Yeah.
system.
Especially someone who like is going to need a lot of intervention. If somebody has been like really desiring low intervention, regardless of like what your thoughts are on that, if they come in and you are like, oh, severe range BPs, so things are going to need to go down today, I feel like your approach should be, how can we make this person feel safe enough to accept care,
Yeah.
and not like, let's bully her until she's
Yeah.
seizing. Like,
Yeah.
that was a little crazy to me.
And I do think there's a lot that we've done in terms of like the media and television and the like this sort of way that we have depicted medical care in TV shows that has sort of given this like big ego to being in the medical field.
Yeah.
And we don't need to have that. I mean, I feel like it's so much easier to be kind and compassionate with our patients, because in return, you oftentimes get people who are more willing to adapt and willing to accept your advice when you don't come in with this big sort of throw your weight around type of ego, which I do kind of sense a little bit here. I do know that the ER might be a little more notorious for that though too, because I mean, they deal with a lot of crap in the ER, but
Yeah. They do.
there's nuance to like introducing, hey, this is going to be a very big sort of divergence from what it is that you wanted in the first place.
Yeah. And like, obviously it's a TV show. Like, I get that they want the most like extreme, most like, they want people to be watching the clips of it. Okay. And
Of
we
course,
are. And
yeah.
so they did the right thing. But also I was kind of like, I don't know, I feel like it would have been a more interesting take, or like a more interesting thing to like bring up discussions about, if it had been like someone who was dismissed by their OB for having symptoms of preeclampsia and then had like come back into the ER with all of these severe symptoms, because that is actually a bigger and more common problem than free birthing. You know what I mean? Like, it is actually like, free birth is a thing, like people do it, but it's not popular. Okay. It's extremely, extremely rare. And actually what is more common is people being like, hey, it feels like something's wrong, and being told you're fine.
Yeah.
And
I think something
that would
else
have
to
been
be
more
said
interesting
about
to
it
me.
too. I feel like, it's interesting that they chose preeclampsia as being the issue, because, that has really nothing to do with her free birth.
Right.
We have patients that manifest preeclampsia. Usually, I mean, preeclampsia, when it gets bad like that, it comes out of nowhere. And she sought medical care. And so even though she had a wild pregnancy, she hadn't actually gone into labor. She wasn't, doing the free birth and it had gone wrong and been derailed and then was brought in. She was actually experiencing something that someone who had been receiving prenatal care likely would have sort of, had come out of nowhere for them as well.
Right. Like it wasn't a situation where like the outcome would have been crazy different if she had had prenatal care. Probably. I mean, obviously there's a potential that she had had like chronic high blood pressures and had not had anything done about it,
Yeah, it's possible. But oftentimes it does manifest quite quickly. So it's hard.
very quickly.
And I will say that, just because someone who does a sort of wild pregnancy doesn't mean that they're not at least attempting to give themselves medical care, likely maybe taking their own blood pressures. A lot of times people are learning how to do those things, which isn't a way to say, it's not, to say that, oh, well, she was probably
It's
monitoring
perfectly
her own
safe.
blood pressures. But it's possible that this was very much something. I mean, it's likely even that this was something that was probably going to happen to this person, whether or not she chose that. But I do think that it was a good way to add a little bit of cinematic interest by making it a sort of wild pregnancy free birth. And the thing is I do think it's good for us to at least call a little bit of attention to that, and also accurately depict the difference, because they did mention, well, do you have a midwife? Do you have a doula? And, what would have been unfortunate is if she was like, yeah, I have a midwife, and then we are, sort of crossing the line and calling free birth something that it's not, because there is a big difference between free birth, where you have no medical attendant whatsoever, and a home birth. Home births, we have a trained midwife, oftentimes a CPM, someone who has been credentialed by their body of sort of credentialing and whatnot. And that's not the case when we do free birth or wild pregnancies.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was funny. I saw Dr. Fran online being like, just ask one OB to consult before you do these scenes. Like, you seemingly ask every other specialty to have like someone consult about like what actually would happen. But then when it comes to the OB stuff, nope. Nope, doesn't seem
I
like
do
it.
always wonder about that. I just think it's so interesting. I think the worst sort of depiction of birth that I've ever seen was on Squid Games, the second season of Squid
I
Games.
didn't watch
Have you seen that? You
I saw the
didn't?
first
Oh my gosh, you
season.
are missing out.
Sorry. I
You are
know.
missing
I saw
out.
the
You need
first
to watch
season. I
it.
didn't see the second one.
Maybe we'll hash that out on our next episode. But
There we go.
just a little teaser for you. Okay, this
Okay.
birth
Okay, got it.
was like it lasted like 4 minutes from first contraction
Course.
to like
Course.
baby out. Like it was, I mean, maybe 4 minutes is an exaggeration, but it was less than 10 minutes, 100% less than 10 minutes from what I remember. It happened all in the span of like this game. Like the game was, I think, 45 minutes or an hour long. Like one of the Squid Games was like an hour long, but
Yeah.
the birth actually took up like 8 minutes of that. And I went through it in a
That's
TikTok
always how
video
it
of
is.
mine once, like, okay, we're having our first contraction now, and now the baby's crowning, and now the baby's born. And it was like just so wildly inaccurate to what birth actually
It's
looks like.
so funny. Yeah, all of labor is pushing. If you're in a TV show, all of labor is pushing.
Yeah. And
Like,
it's always
it's never-
intense. There's no in-betweens or breaks between the pushing, which drives me
No.
crazy. A lot of people don't realize that for a first-time mom who has an epidural, it can take 3, 4, sometimes up to 5 or 6 hours. Like I've seen people push
Yeah.
for 6 hours before. And when you think of that, you think they're pushing intensely the whole time, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're getting breaks in between, which still, I mean, still 5 hours of pushing is
yeah.
an insanely long period of time,
Yeah.
but it's not like
I've
the
seen
movies.
8 hours.
Yeah.
So
I haven't seen that yet.
Crazy.
That is long.
it was crazy. I won't say more about it. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting scene to watch because birth and media is just always funny, or not funny, but not well depicted. But then it being
Interesting.
like
it's always
a
interesting to
medical
watch from
show.
our perspective.
Yes,
There was one,
Yeah.
I think the best depiction of birth that I've seen was in that one movie. Oh, I'm trying to remember the name, but it had Shia LaBeouf in it. And it was showing what I think was supposed to be, it was a home birth. And it was about loss. The movie was about, they lost their baby. I hated that part of it, with that being sort of
Yeah.
the one part that's obviously very unlikely for, a labor that looks and acts completely normal for it to go sideways like that. I mean, it's obviously always possible to have problems arise. Usually that initiates a transfer. The midwife would transfer you in. In this case, I think everything about the whole labor and the birth looked very, very normal. And I felt like they did a great job with the acting and the depiction of it. The only difference between it and really real life, I feel like, was the fact that they really smushed a lot of that into a very short period of time and made it seem like it was much faster than it was. But if you go and take that scene from that movie, whatever movie it is, I can't remember the
Yeah.
name,
That one
and
Shia
sort of
LaBeouf movie.
stretch it out. Yeah, but sort of stretch it out and sort of imagine that it takes
Yeah.
maybe 12 hours instead of like what seems to be like one. That
Yes.
is probably the best sort of look at to what, birth would look like. And then,
Yeah.
and then they have this like, this loss at the end. And then that is typically not happening too, but
Yeah, I always, me and some of my doula friends have talked about how like the most accurate depictions or like the best depictions of birth in media are like in cult media, in like cult movies and stuff, because it's always like a bunch of people around someone who's like, they're like moving in circles and they're like all breathing together and doing all this stuff. And I'm always like, that kind of like is good birth support though. Like, don't support the other things that the cult is doing, but that's good.
You mean like The Handmaid's
that
Tale?
was right.
Breathe.
Yes,
breathe,
yes, exactly,
breathe.
exactly. But I'm kind of
I
like,
hated the
yes.
Handmaid's Tale birth scenes though. No, but you're right.
I mean,
though,
they're
because,
awful,
Like even
but
in the
yeah.
Handmaid's Tale, even though that was not a good example of support. That was terrible.
No.
I mean, how
and like
miserable would that
people
be?
being
But
forced
the
into
acting,
it. Yeah.
the acting of the actual labor and birth and all of that, like when what is that character's name in The Handmaid's Tale?
The girl with the eye patch.
Character without the eye. I'm losing my mind because obviously I should know this. I love
don't
The
remember
Handmaid's
her.
Tale. Like she gets on a birth stool. I'm like, hell yeah,
Yeah.
utilize that birth stool.
Yeah,
But no, I mean,
I think the main character
it's
has like
unfortunate to
prodromal
see-
labor. I was like, awesome.
Yes.
Love that
No,
was
you're right,
depicted.
you're right.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that
don't
was
love
funny.
the fact
And
though, like in that show, the way that they tried to induce labor was with sex,
yeah,
and that doesn't work. That's not a real thing. And you would
no,
think that the people of Gilead, because I mean the whole idea of Gilead
right.
and everything is that they're like returning to their roots, all homemade cooking. They're trying to get rid of environmental toxins, so they're crunchy. That's what they are. They're crunchy a little bit. I mean,
They're
not
very crunchy. Yeah.
and religious. Not trying to
I
make a
mean, yeah,
connection
they're
between
Christian
crunchy and
nationalists, but
cult, but
yeah.
still, they're crunchy. And so you would think that they would know what works and what doesn't work. Sex
I
does
know.
not
Come on.
work. Maybe an
No.
orgasm from mom could help, but we know that that's not what they were trying to achieve in The Handmaid's
We
Tale.
know
So
that's not what they were doing. No, no. There's like a cult, there's like a TV show that Mae Martin is in that came out this year about like a go away school for like difficult children. Anyway, but there's a birth scene in the end of that is culty, that is pretty good, and it's a home birth, and like everybody's totally fine. It's a little culty. There are like a lot of people there, and it's a little woo woo. But all the scenes like that, I'm kind of like, yeah, that is kind of what it's like sometimes.
So let's move on to
Yes.
my next thing that I wanted to talk about. So this
Okay.
was a post online, and so I want to read to you what they think and get your opinion
Okay.
on it.
Okay.
Joe has not seen this post probably, so we'll just get your reaction to it.
We'll see.
Okay, so this doula does not support, and a little side note, just in case anyone's forgotten, Joe's a doula, so she would have the best opinion on this. Okay,
Right.
so this person is a doula who only supports planned, spontaneous, unmedicated births, and this is her elaborating on it. Yes, I'm a doula who only attends planned, spontaneous, unmedicated births, and here's why. As a doula, I support a woman's right to choose whatever she wants for her birth. But when it comes to my services and the births that I attend, I only take clients who are planning a spontaneous, unmedicated birth. Once I truly learned how birth works physiologically and what supports it best, I had to get honest about my own boundaries. Birth works best when it's left alone, when labor begins on its own, when the mother can move, feel, and respond to what her body and baby are doing together. Inductions for non-medicated or non-medical reasons and routine medicated births carry risks, and I'm personally not comfortable planning as a birth worker for those risks. Medications cross the baby, epidurals limit movement and sensation, and interventions can start a cascade that changes the whole course of birth. That doesn't mean I abandon my clients if birth takes a different turn. If a medical reason truly calls for an induction, or if something shifts during labor and an epidural becomes the right decision in that moment, I'm still there supporting them. Birth can unfold in unexpected ways, and my job is to support the mother through that. But when we enter the birth space together, the plan and intention is a spontaneous, unmedicated birth. Birth workers are allowed to have boundaries just like anyone else. What are your thoughts?
I have so many thoughts. But if you can't advocate for your client, just say that is mostly my thoughts. Like, if you don't have the skills to get someone a lovely birth experience, even if they're planning an epidural, just say that. I have said this before online, but it is easiest, like the easiest births that I am ever at are spontaneous out of hospital labors. Like,
Yeah. You don't
it
have to do
is,
a whole
there
lot.
are, yes, and there are just things about like being a really low risk person already and being unmedicated. There are things about that just like make that kind of honestly, like that doula is saying, right? It lets things kind of just like go naturally in a easier way
No,
most of the time. You're
absolutely.
already
You're
moving
supporting
around, like all of that stuff.
physiologic
So
birth.
yes, and so like my job is easier in those births.
And I noticed that too.
But
So when I worked as a
yeah.
home birth midwife, I noticed that the doulas that we had there in all of those births, because most people did have doulas, they didn't do a lot. And I remember thinking like,
Yes.
dang, why didn't I do more, home birth? Well, I know why I didn't do more home births is because people who
Right.
wanted home births in the Bay Area wanted to hire people who were not a nurse. I was a nurse at the time, and that was like a turnoff. So I
Yeah.
mostly got the more medicated births and people who were interested in the induction or
Yeah.
who wanted to get the epidural. Maybe they wanted to postpone, but yeah, I remember just like there weren't a whole lot of hip squeezes, there weren't a whole lot, and they probably could have done more of those things, but they didn't need to, because the person that was giving birth in this home birth setting took a lot of childbirth classes, maybe had already had
Yes.
multiple babies
Yeah.
before, didn't really
Is
need as much
already
support.
Yeah, they are already completely comfortable with their entire care team. They know them. They're in a comfortable place already. They have access to a tub. Like all of these things are kind of set up in like low risk, spontaneous, unmedicated births to kind of do the things that you need to do most of the time. And so I like understand what she's saying because there is some truth to that. It does often go well when like nothing is happening. But here's the thing is that means that my skills as a doula are for the clients who do not want that or cannot have that. And so, so much of my like advocacy skills are for my clients who are having an elective induction, or they're for my clients who medically they can't go past 39 weeks or they're not comfortable doing that, or 37 weeks, right? Or whatever it is, or my clients who are planning an epidural. Like you have to understand a lot more about like labor and body and spinning babies and all of that kind of stuff for epiduralized clients because you are doing a lot more of that movement. And so if you don't want to attend those kinds of births, like my takeaway from that is kind of like you don't want to do the actual work
Yeah.
of this.
You
You
know,
don't want
I
to be the
took
person that's keeping someone safe if you just
my
want them
sort
to
of,
already be there.
yeah. My sort of initial reaction to that is similar, except I kind of took it as maybe she has those skills and just decided she doesn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
I imagine, and this is something I've noticed when I was a doula, and a lot of the people that they weren't friends of mine necessarily, but there were people that I knew in the community that decided they maybe did a lot of hospital births and just like, you know, accepted everybody and were supportive of everybody and all their
Yeah.
different desires, and then decided, never mind, not anymore. I'm only doing birth center birth. I'm only doing home birth. And I think honestly, what it's giving is like too like big for your britches, like, oh, I'm too good for that, and selfish. Honestly, that's like the big thing is like it's very self-serving. Like a lot of I think a lot of us get into birth work because we think it's beautiful and transformative
Yeah.
and just I mean
Yes. Yeah.
just the whole concept of being there for this new person's first breath and the sort of transformation that the mom goes through where she goes from, you know, kind of into this like phase of motherhood and everything is like so profound and beautiful. And I can see how you could not be, if you're not careful, let those feelings go from like wanting to be a patient advocate and wanting to be there for your patients into, like doing it just for your own benefit of like you want to feel
Yeah.
that sort of birth high and like you love being around
Yes.
it and all of that, but
Yes.
you're not actually there. It's not for the mom, it's not to empower the women that you're serving, it's because you just like being around it. And at that point I feel gross about that because I feel like birth is so vulnerable. And I've always, I mean, we say that, I've always said birth is vulnerable. When I had my last baby unmedicated, it takes that to a whole new
Yeah.
meaning, I feel
Yeah.
like just how completely exposed and vulnerable and just like not helpless, because it's also very powerful. Like you can feel like just, I mean, it is a powerful state of bringing a child into the world. Your body's doing it all by itself. It's amazing. But also you need help. It feels like you're drowning, you know, and you need like a
Yeah.
life preserver or something
Yeah.
like that. And so to sort of put yourself into those spaces when you're kind of just there to for maybe your own gain, you know, monetarily, like you're making money
Yeah.
off of this, but then also like, you know, you get to be around the types of births where, you know, everything just kind of unfolds naturally and beautifully. And yeah, sometimes it is from an observer's standpoint more fun, quote unquote fun, to like be in one of those births where you got the fairy lights and everything's just like there's a tub and it's like the music and the essential
Yeah.
oils and all of that, and it feels very like what you picture being a doula to feel like. But that's not where the work is like really done, and so it
No.
feels a little bit like it's for
No.
the doula at that point.
No, and I think it puts a weird it puts a weird pressure on clients too to be like, I'm letting someone else
sure.
down if I make this other decision, or I'm gonna kind of like lose the support of my paid support person. I'm going to lose their support if I choose to have this induction, or if I, you know, choose to get an epidural, or whatever it is. Like you can't put your client in a situation where like you want something for them more than they want it. And I think it's irresponsible to not support the decisions that your clients make, even if you don't agree with them or they're not something that you would maybe choose for yourself. And
It's
that being said,
my
I do think that there are like, I think that there's a line, right? And there's also like, I think there's some gray area, essentially, because I think that like we are allowed to have boundaries. Like, I don't think that I would take on someone who is planning a free birth, personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And that's another
but
topic I kind of wanted to get into too, is just like
yeah.
about boundaries. But I will say, real
Yeah.
quick, before we move on to
Yeah.
that for anybody listening who is considering getting a doula, number one, get a doula. They're very, very helpful. And I'm not just saying that because
I agree.
Joe's the
Thank you.
doula, but still, I'm saying it because legitimately they are supported in the research. They are wonderful and amazing. However, please do not get a doula that has very weird and, like over the top, quote unquote, boundaries. I mean, there will be people out there that will hire those doulas, but like you, I feel like the average person really does need somebody who not only, like what Joe is saying, needs somebody who sees all different types of birth outcomes and knows how to support those different outcomes, knows how to help support physiologic birth even when birth has turned into a little less of a physiologic process. When we go into an induction, maybe
Yeah.
unexpectedly, we can still use, birth positioning and whatnot to help bring baby down and get baby into the right position and all of that. But even beyond that, like the pressure, you do not want to be surrounded by somebody who you feel like is judging you, even for a moment. So definitely be
Yes.
careful about the doulas that you work with and ask that question. Do you have a preference over what kind of births you support? Do you prefer home births versus hospital births versus inductions? And listen
Yeah.
carefully to their answer, and how you feel about that, because sometimes we don't know, what kind of birth outcome we're going to get. And sometimes, people who desperately wanted that home birth end up with the induction that they didn't want.
Yep.
And you need to know that you have somebody in your corner that is going to be able to adapt to that. But let's talk a little bit about
Yeah.
boundaries, because that was another thought
Yeah.
that I had after I read this, which was I do have a strong opinion as healthcare providers and birth attendants in general. We have boundaries that we are allowed to have. And, I think there's a big difference between supporting somebody's desire and their choices and respecting their autonomy. But I do think that providers and nurses and doulas and all of that also deserve autonomy over what it is that they do and what they participate in. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult I think it's a really difficult conversation because I think that like providers are in a very different situation than doulas are in. And it kind of goes both ways, right? Where like providers are like, if you're at the hospital and you're like, I want to do this thing, and your provider's like, no. Um, they still like they can't abandon care, right? Legally. Like you still are taking care of that person even if they're making decisions that you don't agree with. And for doulas, there's no like legal, you're not going to get sued, probably. Who knows? But doulas
Mm-hmm.
likely are not going to get sued for being like, I don't feel safe in this situation anymore, and I'm going to take myself out. And actually, I have been in that situation before. When my like first year of being a doula, I was hired by somebody, and they said some things in their prenatal visit that made me very sure that we were in fact not aligned, and I stopped care with them. I refunded them their money. But I was like, oh, those are not opinions that I align with or feel comfortable even like supporting. And it was just like, it wasn't even about birth stuff. But I think that we are allowed to have boundaries that keep us safe. But I also think that there's a little bit more of a complicated conversation when it comes to doulas, because while I wouldn't personally take on a free birth client, and I think people who are looking for a free birth are not coming to me. They're not reading my website and going, that's the doula for me. I
Yeah.
also think that if I had a client who felt like that was the decision that they had to make, I don't think I would feel comfortable discontinuing care with them. And I think that's a really hard thing where like a midwife, right, or a doctor, if your patient is like, well, I'm going to not work with you anymore. I'm not going to get this care. I think that there's a little bit of a different dynamic there because our job is to support them. And if my client doesn't have another option and doesn't feel safe with their provider, I don't know what I would do. And I haven't been in that situation, but I don't know what I would do. And I think it's hard to make that call.
Yeah, it's a little dicey, right? Because I think abandoning care of somebody is wrong.
Yeah.
But at completely separate from that, I feel like there are a lot of things that, like, for example, if a patient comes in and says, like, I want a C-section at 36 weeks or something like that,
Yeah.
and I was an obstetrician that could do a C-section and everything, I don't have to honor that request.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's that end of the spectrum, and then there's the end of the spectrum of like, well, if you don't do exactly what I say, I'm going to drop you from care. And I think that those are not real that's not a healthy, normal
Yes.
boundary to have as a provider. But I also think that it is reasonable and fair for providers to have boundaries of like, well, I don't feel comfortable using this or that intervention
Yes.
or doing it this way because I feel that it is unsafe. And so it kind of puts patients into a position where you do have a lot of control, but you might not be able to force, for example, an induction or for your provider to use induction medications a certain way. If your provider doesn't want to give you a fourth dose or a third dose or even a second dose of misoprostol, maybe, you can't force them to, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that that's the line, right? Is like there's a difference between asking a provider to not do something and refusing some amount of care. That is almost in every single case allowed or should be supported, where somebody is like, nope, you're not doing that thing to me. But the opposite is not true. You can't come in and go, well, I want an induction because I'm 37 weeks and I just want to be done being pregnant.
Yeah.
You can't, come in and desire your Pitocin to go up beyond 30 if you're not at a hospital that can support that. Like those kinds of things you can't ask someone to do because they are actively intervening and you are asking them to physically do something that they are not comfortable doing. And that is very different than being like, well, I'm going to ask you to sit back and we'll see what my body does.
Yeah. I honestly think, though, that if we all in the medical field kind of recognized the differences between that, and it would maybe give us a greater sense of like where those lines are. Because for me personally, I think part of what makes me feel so capable of allowing my patients to do whatever it is they want to do, with their body, like not feeling like I have to control the whole situation, is remembering that I do still have some autonomy as the midwife, and that, there are certain boundaries that I have, and I have control over what my hands do, right? And what I do with my body, right? And what what risks I present, with the things that I want to do. And so that kind of helps me be like, you're not completely out of control as the provider. And that, I think, allows us to see very black and white of like, well, if it's not, breaking this person's water or giving maybe an unsafe amount of this medication or something like that, if it's more like this patient wants to go through labor, even though it's a VBAC, and I might not be comfortable with the, with VBACs, well, that's still their body, right? So I don't get to decide what they do. It's when we cross over into, well, now this person who's, pursuing a VBAC, right, doing a TOLAC, a trial of labor after cesarean, now this person wants me to give them Cytotec. That's where my power and my autonomy as a provider comes in, where I can say no. That's where I can draw the line. And I think it makes things a little bit more black and white, which I think helps human beings recognize like where the line in the sand is. And it does kind of bring me to my next sort of thing I wanted to talk about, which is the incidence of those forced cesareans that I'm sure you heard about and that has been talked about online, because in both of those scenarios we had two patients that were pursuing VBACs, vaginal births after a cesarean, and the providers did not feel comfortable supporting that desire. And the patients were in the hospital setting, there to be supported and monitored, but did not want a cesarean, did not want intervention. They just wanted the safety net of being in the hospital. So for everybody listening, in these scenarios, the patient declined. And the medical team got the courts involved and got a judge to rule on whether or not they should be allowed to force a cesarean onto a woman who did not want one based on the risk that might have been there for the baby. The risk really in this situation
Yeah.
would be the risk of uterine rupture mainly. After you've had a cesarean, you go into labor. Strength of those contractions can sometimes cause the uterus to rupture in the place where they had that incision. But the risk of that for an average TOLAC is going to be less than 1%. So in these cases, these women were forced to have cesareans that they didn't want, were forced to be, set into a courtroom on Zoom while they were in labor, while they were contracting with no representation, and had a judge rule on whether or not they should be allowed to make decisions about their own medical care.
I think the first thing I want to say is that, like, to be very, very clear, this is what obstetric violence looks like. Like, it is not always a check without consent. It's not like physically forcing someone to do something. It is this kind of thing. And when we were talking about bringing the courts, police involved in Black women's healthcare, that is obstetric violence. And that is how racism perpetuates through this system over and over and over again and doesn't get better, is because of doctors thinking that they have this amount of authority, or that the courts should have this amount of authority over someone's decision about their body. I think that while people online are wrong most of the time when they are talking about how dangerous these situations were, like, I saw people even in like my comment section being like, there was a 58% chance of uterine rupture, which would have been fatal to everyone involved. That's not true. I don't know where people are getting these numbers about how dangerous VBACs are, how dangerous breech deliveries are. Like, are things more dangerous than something else? Yes. But most of the time, even when we're looking at something that is like completely contraindicated, the like ACOG agrees people should not attempt it, whatever, we're still looking at under 4%. We're still looking at relatively small numbers, right? Like,
So when someone comes in and doesn't want a blood transfusion, I don't get to force a blood transfusion on them, even to save their life.
Exactly.
People get to decide if they want medical care, even if it's life-threatening. And I think the muddy part here is the way that we don't allow women who are pregnant to make their own decisions because of the baby, because the baby's involved. But I think a really important point to think about is that every single thing that we do or don't do in obstetrics is going to come with risk. And that risk is on the person who is having the baby. So if we're forcing, the C-section itself comes with its own risks, and not doing the C-section and going for the VBAC is going to have its own risks.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's the mom who's going to have to recover from that C-section, pick her baby up every day, potentially without a lot of support, find a way to make that work. And it's also the mom that's going to have to deal with the consequences of potentially having a uterine rupture. And it's really just about which risks and consequences is she more okay with, more comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, if I force somebody to have a C-section as their provider, I get to go home and never have to deal with that, or if I don't want to, ever think about it ever again, So what gives me the right to force that on somebody else? A hero complex and superiority complex, I think, is what gives that.
Yeah, and I think and that's exactly what I was gonna say, is that I actually think this is an extremely black and white issue where I actually don't care what the risks were involved. I actually don't care to empathize with the doctors trying to make everything safe for everyone. What I care about is someone legally allowed to make decisions about their own body and their own baby? And my answer is going to be yes, 100% of the time. And these were clearly people who had the information. They had multiple conversations. These were people who understood what the statistics were. They were not people who were coming in with no care in the world, no idea what any of the risks were, not wanting to hear anything. They had discussions with providers before making these decisions. And
these are very well educated women. I know at least one of them was a doula. Was a doula. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, it's extremely frustrating to me because I don't want to hear people arguing about what the actual risks were online. I want people to go, I don't care what the risks were. You do not involve the fucking courts.
It's so not the point. It's so not the point. It's so not the point.
It's so not the point.
Yeah, because again, every single thing comes with risk, and it's all about what is your individual risk tolerance and what are you willing to accept as risk. And you're comparing the difference between, a slightly longer labor process with potential death on the other end. And so it seems so obvious to the outside person which one you should choose. But at the end of the day, that person is going to have to be the one that lives with the consequences. So it is that person's decision, and there's only, but apparently in the United States, and this is something that's been happening for a long time, usually one-off circumstances, but apparently we are okay with it being legal for judges who are completely unrelated to the situation, completely, removed from the situation and those consequences, making decisions for women. It brings me back to the times when women had to get approval from their husbands and from their doctor to get on birth control. And gosh, what a dark time for women that
No.
was.
I'm like, can you see how little congressmen can understand about like how Facebook works? You think that they understand obstetric care? Like, people don't know what they're talking about enough to be making any kind of these decisions, and especially not some like random judge on a Tuesday.
And it's all driven by
Yeah.
culture too. It's driven by the culture that we have in the
Yeah.
United States that says that more medical intervention is better most of the time. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to paint, like, medical intervention is very helpful. We have every single medical intervention that we use has a time and a place. Even in episiotomy, like even some of the things that you would never want done, they have a time and a place, and they can be life saving. But I
Yes.
do think that we have a culture in the United States that kind of normalizes the overuse of medical intervention, like it doesn't come with an issue. I had a patient not too long ago who wanted a VBAC as well. And my practice is very supportive of VBACs, and everything's been normal and wonderful with her pregnancy. And, at one point we were talking about, going past her due date and at what point would she maybe want to consider being induced. And she had mentioned, well, if I make it to X point in pregnancy, I think I'll just opt for the cesarean. And she had seen other providers in this pregnancy besides me. But it wasn't until she had said that I sat down with her and said, well, okay, that sounds good to me, but let's talk about some of the risks first. And first I need to ask you, how big do you want your family to be? She said she wanted 5 to 6 kids. And this was her second baby, and she'd already had a C-section
Yeah.
with her first baby. So I was like, well, we highly, highly recommend that you do not have more than maybe 2 or 3 C-sections. After 3 C-sections, it gets to the point where we really recommend you be sterilized or have some sort of really highly effective contraception, because C-sections increase the risk mainly. There's obviously a risk of damage to nearby organs. There's higher risk of bleeding. There's a lot of infection, all of that. But in addition to that no one talks about, there are risks to subsequent pregnancies. It increases the risk of miscarriage. You have to wait longer in between pregnancies, or, you could have additional
Placenta
problems because of
accreta
that.
is no
That's what I was going to
joke.
say.
Yeah.
Your placenta can grow into your incision and not be able, we can't remove it. And then you have a postpartum hemorrhage and perish. These are big things. And it limits family size. So
Yeah.
no one had told her this. No one had told her this. She had conversations with other providers in her previous pregnancy as well as this present pregnancy, and no one had asked her how many kids she wanted to have. And so she was about to schedule this cesarean without knowing that and without considering that risk. And so, I think that it's very important that we recognize that there's a lot of nuance to making these types of decisions. And when people come in to TikTok comments and think that they know, everything, and that it's all about protecting the baby and all, like, we actually, unless you have trained and studied in this field, you really have no idea what you're talking about. Is
And
that
like
harsh?
it just speaks to
Did that
the
come off a
no,
little
it's
harsh?
I think it comes off of the
You
amount of
don't know
harsh
what you're
that it
talking
needed to
about.
be. You don't know what you're talking about. But I also think it speaks to
I
like
just,
the culture of the like pro-life culture that has been gotten so ingrained, and especially with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I think like the way that people are have like free reign to just like care more about a baby's existence than like an adult female human like that is pregnant
yeah. They're
is
not
makes
mutually
me
exclusive things,
crazy.
though. Like, we don't
Yeah.
have to abandon the health and safety of the baby, so that we can treat mothers with respect and dignity and honor their choices. In fact, I would say that most of the time, what's best for mom is also what's best for baby, because mom is the decision-making, logic-bearing adult that can think through what her life circumstances look like, the things that are important to her, her values, and whatnot, and weigh that along with the risks and benefits. And what I have found is that when you truly explain all of the things that someone needs to know, they make the right choice. This whole archetype person of like, she's pregnant and she doesn't want any medical intervention, or she wants to make this decision that's reckless or whatever, and you explain all of the risks and benefits, and she just still wants to do it her own way. That is a rare type of caricature of a
Very
woman
much
that comes
so.
through. Sometimes there are people, and these people tend to have immense amounts of trauma, previous, birth trauma, and just issues with being mistreated in their medical care. You do have people that are very resistant, but I find that 99+% of people, even people who appear resistant at first, will become significantly less resistant when you talk to them with respect and you
Yes.
honor the way that these decisions are going to actually impact their body and their life and their family. And
Yeah.
when they can sense that in you, they almost always listen to what you have to say, and they make a decision that I think
Yeah.
is maybe a little bit more middle of the road than maybe the decision they were going to make or something. And I think that is a good example of why we need to put the ball in their court, because the second that you try to force
Yes.
somebody into doing something that they don't want to do is when you sort of create more distrust.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, it is the idea that some providers have of just like eye rolling and shaming people out of their medical decisions. It's going to make them make decisions that make you roll your eyes more.
Like the
You
Pitt
have to
episode.
be like the Pitt episode. And I mean, I've had multiple clients who were not going to do vitamin K at all. They were like, that is not for me. I've read about it. I do not want to do it. Switch to a home birth practice, have 2-hour plus prenatals with their midwives where they can actually have a sit down discussion about it, and their midwives aren't being like horrible and shamey about it. And then they're like, oh, actually, I learned new things and now I'm going to do it. And it's literally because they're like crunchy home birth midwives were able to sit down with them and actually talk to them just about risks and benefits without any of the shaming of the, oh, we do it for everyone, of the like, you don't care about your baby's safety, all of these things. Like this idea that so many people online and some providers as well have of like this like mystical person that cares more about their birth experience than their safety does not exist. Like people think that the experience that they want is the thing that will keep them the most safe. Nobody is out here being like, I want a home birth because I don't care about if my baby lives or dies. I just want this magical experience. Literally no one thinks that. And the idea that people do is so patronizing and gross to me.
Yeah, there's this story I heard recently from a provider, and this is a common, I think, occurrence that I interact with a lot, where we have somebody that comes in who did not want an induction, wanted a home birth, or an unmedicated birth or a birth center birth or whatever, and is having to be induced, and they show up and they don't want any induction, anything. And I mean, any labor and delivery nurse that's worked more than a year probably in labor and delivery has had a patient like this where they come in and they don't want anything, and it's kind of like, well, why are you here? I think that's the common response from a lot of people is like, well, why are you here then? Because we need to do these things. Like, why did you agree to the induction?
Yes.
If you didn't want to do any of these things. And I think, as they progress through, it's like, well, they declined the misoprostol, or they took a dose and then we waited another, 24 hours between the next dose, or we started at, Pitocin at 1 and then kept it there for hours because the patient wouldn't let us go up. And I hear these stories, and from my perspective as a midwife, I'm always in the back of my head thinking, did they sit down and explain things really, truly, like fully, without the sense of like judgment and shame that I feel like I can sense from the telling of this story? Because I have never yet, and maybe I will come across a patient one day, but I have not yet met one of these, patients in this scenario, which again is a scenario that happens a lot, and sat down and said, listen, we don't have to do anything you don't want to do. We can sit here and we can play Scrabble until, the cows come home, kind of thing. Or I can send you home. You know what I mean? You can go home. And here are the risks of that. And, this is what can happen if we don't induce, but that is another option. But here are all of the reasons why. Here are all of the risks. And hey, I'm not telling you these risks to scare you. I'm just giving you the reality of the situation. And I want you to decide what risks you're willing to accept and which ones are too much, which ones you cannot tolerate. And you just tell me, but when I present it that way, almost every single time, I mean, every single time so far in my experience, they work with me a little bit. And maybe we do take that induction a little bit slow, but I don't need to be bitter about that or judgmental or frustrated about that. You know, it is a part of a skill set that we as birth workers and providers should have, where we can meet patients where they're at. And that's what I feel like I do every day in clinic, where you were saying, well, in the home birth setting, the midwives are going to go and talk and give, a 2-hour visit and all of that. And it is hard to do that when you're an OBGYN or you're a midwife. Yeah. Well, I will say what I do, how I kind of try to get around it. Most patients that I interact with, and this is as a result of our culture again, this just the general birth culture that we have in the United States, where most of my patients, they want to be told what to do. They want to come in and be told when they can be induced and whether or not they're allowed, to have a cervical check or this or that. Yeah. And instead of trying to change those patients, I humor them in that, because I do think that it provides them a level of comfort, and I think that it takes off
and the
a lot of the
decision
weight.
Fatigue in pregnancy is so crazy.
Exactly. It's a burden to bear for, I think, a lot of patients, especially when you have very little health literacy, to have to try to navigate all of the nuances. Sometimes you want to go to see a provider just so that they can tell you what to do. And I get that.
Yes.
So instead of spending hours with that patient, I give that patient my recommendation, and they usually take it, and then the visit's over. And then I offset the visits where I need to spend a little bit of extra time with a patient and really explain the risks and benefits, because they want that active role in the decision-making process. I offset those visits by, giving the people what they want. And that's, I feel like, the definition for me of meeting someone where they're at.
Yes, definitely. And I think it goes such a long way just to be how can we get to the same goal of getting your baby here? And where can I provide you flexibility? Let me tell you what I normally would do, and then let me tell you some flexibilities or some alternate scenarios. And I feel like most people respond really well to that. If someone is being I'll be honest, this is normally what I would suggest. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, let's find a middle ground. Let's find a way to make things start to happen, but give you some flexibility there. I think it's rare people will say no to that.
Any people that are listening that are pregnant right now, I know this is a lot of talk where, this is probably more helpful to the healthcare providers listening or the doulas listening. But for people who are pregnant right now, I feel like it is really important that you do what you can to find somebody who's well aligned with you. And I know that that's not easy for everybody. There are areas where you don't have access to a lot of different healthcare providers. You have to work with what you have. But if you do have access to more than one, interview around, if you're the kind of person that wants the information, you want to make your own decisions, there are providers out there, hopefully ones in your area, but you're definitely not going to find them if you kind of accept the first one. And personally, in my experience being pregnant, I think it's really easy to get attached to a healthcare provider when you're pregnant.
True. And feel bad
when you switch
thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it's the way that our brains literally change in pregnancy. Your brain matter evolves and just completely changes in pregnancy, and it makes you more risk averse, and it makes you more caring and comforting and attuned with other people's emotions and whatnot, so that you can take better care of your baby. But I think part of that too is feeling like this need to cling to the first sort of safe space or the safe person that you meet. And so it can feel oftentimes when you meet a new provider in pregnancy that that you're attached to this person. And a lot of times people have a hard time detaching themselves from a provider that then throws up a lot of red flags during their prenatal care. So that's why early on in pregnancy, you want to be discerning and ask good questions and decide if this is the right person, because early on, usually there's not a lot of problems that are manifesting. It's later, it's at the end of pregnancy when you're already very much connected and sort of bonded to this provider, where things pop up. So asking questions in the early part of your care is important.
Yeah, and I also want to say for anybody who does not have the lovely privilege of being able to choose your providers in your hospital and all of that, or maybe you don't even have access to getting a doula, the thing that you have a lot of control over when you are actually at the hospital, when you are in labor, is you do have some control over who your nurse is. And I will say, as a doula, like, I learned so much of my advocacy skills from watching labor and delivery nurses because I will tell you, no one disagrees more with the midwife or the OB's take on what should happen next than the labor and delivery nurses. Like, they're the ones actually laboring with you, and they often will be a little bit more like, I don't think you need to do that actually right now, or whatever it is, right? They're very different people, and they're the ones actually spending time with you. So if you get a nurse that you like love and really align with, ask them to choose someone out for you at shift change that aligns. And if you get someone that you don't feel aligned with or you don't feel comfortable with, you can fire your nurse and get a different one and get switched to somebody else. And like that, if you are able to make that happen, that can be a huge game changer in your labor, even if you weren't somebody where you had the availability to like get a different provider or get
And if
a
you
really
have a
great advocate or
partner,
whatever.
if you have a
Yeah.
partner and you don't feel comfortable being the one to fire the nurse, get the partner up to speed on that being a
Yes.
possibility. You know, make a safe
Yeah.
word, pineapple. Go fire the nurse.
Whatever. Yeah.
At the end of the day, what Joe's saying here is very true in the sense that it can make a huge difference in overall your whole birth outcome and your whole birth experience. And little plug for Jen Hamilton's new Birth Vibes book, which you can find at
Yeah.
wearlulu.com. She talks a lot about the way that it's not about what happens during your labor. It's about how people treat you, how they talk to you, how they care for you,
Yeah.
that causes birth trauma. And birth trauma is very, very real. And that right there is the oxytocin effect, because as we've
That's
talked
right.
about, I think in previous episodes, oxytocin plays a huge role in the way that you interpret social interaction. It's the bonding hormone. It helps you remember. It actually plays a really important role in memory as well. And so a lot of people, my theory is that a lot of people remember the negative experiences that they have in labor and delivery even better because they are flooded with
Yeah.
oxytocin that is playing a role in helping them sort of store those memories. And so you will carry some of the good and the bad with you the rest of your life. So it's important, I think, to do what you can to surround yourself with good energy and have that good experience. And if you don't have the best experience, find someone who will talk to you about it afterwards, because boy, can that help to place those memories in a good place. Because I want all of you to be able to remember your birth experience in a positive way. I mean, it's a beautiful day. It's one of the most important days of our lives, I think, for a lot of us. And there's no reason to, there's no good reason why someone should walk away from their birth and feel confused or, insulted. Like, we as providers should be providing you with, sort of a debriefing, a little bit of love and care afterwards, so that you can feel like you walked away from that experience, knowing what happened, knowing why it happened, and being able to put those memories in the place that they need to be put for you to not hold that birth trauma and carry that around with you. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
It's
That
a little
was
bit heavy
fun.
at times, but I
Yeah.
think
I think
that
talking
was
about the like
good.
current events and stuff is helpful for us to process what we're seeing online and all of that, and hopefully interesting for you guys to listen to our takes on all the things that you're seeing on TikTok all the time, I'm sure as well.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here, and let us know if there's anything else you want us to talk about for next week. But thank you for listening, and we will see you on Friday.